Hi everyone, I'm Lisa from Pink Holly Bush Designs and welcome to Let's Make Your Daughter a Dress. So today I'm going to go through the tools that you need to sew your daughter a dress that it's assumed if you're a sewist you have. And if you're a beginner, you might not have them or you might not know you need them. So I'm going to go through the basics that you absolutely need to have in order to have a good result. And I'm also going to go through some optional tools that would make it a little bit easier and you might want to consider picking up. So before you delve into making the dress, I want to make sure you have everything you need. So let's get started with that. Well, of course, the first thing you need is a sewing machine. Now, you don't need an expensive machine. They can cost thousands and thousands of dollars. But the basic $100 big box store sewing machine will enable you to be successful and create a beautiful dress for your daughter. So if you're just getting started, that's a great place to start. You want one that has a basic zigzag and straight stitch and can do a buttonhole. So as long as it can do those three things, you will be in great shape. So once you have your sewing machine, the next thing you're going to need is a package of needles that will work in the machine. And for the July Flowers dress, with the fabric that we're going to be using, no matter which choice you make, and I'll be going over fabric choices in the next video, you're going to want a size 80-12 universal needle. Okay? So make sure to pick up a big package of them. If you at any point are having trouble with your stitches on the sewing machine and things are a little wonky, the very first thing you're going to do is replace the needle, and 80 to 90% of the time that will solve the problem. So make sure you have a bunch of needles, so if you need to do that you can. So once you have your sewing machine needles, the next thing you're going to need is a package of hand sewing needles. There are going to be times you're going to have to do a few little things by hand. It's just to the nature of sewing. And I actually love hand stitching, so don't shy away from that. So what you want in hand sewing needles are what's called sharps. If it doesn't designate what they are, they probably are sharps. That's the basic hand sewing needle. You can get a package that has multiple sizes, but a size 7 or 8 is a really great all-purpose hand sewing needle. So if you get one of those, you'll be in good shape. All right, so we have our needles. Next thing you're going to need is something to measure yourself with and to measure the fabric with. So you need a tape measure. Okay, nothing fancy, just a basic tape measure. And you're going to want a ruler as well. So you absolutely can use your basic school ruler. I have many times. But if you are purchasing something, a clear one is very handy. And if you think you're going to be interested in really doing a lot of sewing, or if you want to get into quilting or anything like that, going with the thicker clear one that can be used with a rotary cutter is something you might want to invest in. These are a little bit more pricey, so if that's not an option at this point, go with that school ruler, or these little thin clear ones will enable you to get done what you need to, and those are just fine. So those are rulers. Okay, next up, you need some way to cut your fabric, and you really want to get a pair of sharp fabric cutting shears. I know in the US, Joann's, if you get the coupon, they put these on sale, and it's worth going and getting them. These are Gingher. Gingher are great. You can mail them back into the company and they will sharpen them and mail them back to you. Fiskars is another brand in the US, but get yourself a good pair of cutting shears and then keep them for only fabric. You never want to use those for cutting paper, which is why you probably want to get just a basic pair of paper cutting scissors to also have in your sewing room, because you're never going to use your fabric ones. It will dull your fabric ones very quickly, so you don't want to do that. Okay, once we are cutting our fabric out, we're also going to need pins. I recommend that you spend a little bit more if you don't have pins already, and you buy glass head pins. Why? Because glass head pins will not melt if you iron over them. And yes, that brings us to the next thing you need, and that's an iron. A steamer will not work, and you absolutely do need to have an iron. It does not need to be an expensive one. The college special that you get really cheap will work and do a great job. But you do need to be able to press your seams as you're going along. And if you don't, you will get something that looks really homemade in the very negative sense of that word. So an iron is just a crucial piece of equipment when you are sewing. Next up, you need some way to mark your fabric. And gosh, marking your fabric is kind of controversial in the sewing world. Why? Because I think every sewist has a horror story about the markings not coming out of the finished garment. So there's a lot of different choices. My preference when I'm constructing, which is what we're going to be doing, is to use the disappearing ink, the purple one. Why? Because it disappears, and I really have not had any trouble with it coming back. It's typically the blue marker, which disappears when it gets wet, that tends to cause trouble. It often can be heat set. But sometimes you just need to be able to mark and have that mark still be there the next day. And with the purple one, that's not going to happen. So you can get one of these that has both the purple and blue options. This one by Styla is just the blue that's water soluble. And then Soline makes this twisty one that has 3 different colors, a white, a gray, and a pink. If you're going to make your dress out of a darker fabric, like I did here with this July flowers, I was using the white to mark this when I couldn't with the purple. Okay, what else do we need? A seam ripper. Now, I promise you're going to make mistakes. I always do, and I've been sewing for over 20 years. So you need a seam ripper to just take them out when you make it and fix them and go on. So make sure you get one of those. Other thing you need, just a good old bottle of water, spray bottle. You'll use it with the ironing, and again, it will help get that professional finish. Doesn't have to be any kind of special spray bottle, just one that can spray the water. And you also are going to need some interfacing. Now, again, interfacing is something we can have a whole long discussion about, but this is French Views. I'll link to it below. It is a stretch interfacing. Okay, it's very lightweight, and I use the stretch interfacing even with woven fabrics that have no stretch. This is just, I keep it in stock, and this is what I use 90% of the time, and I've been very pleased with that. So alternatives you can use are the German interfacing or the French baby interfacing. Both of those are fairly expensive. I think they retail for $15 to $17 a yard. This retails for $6 a yard. So I've been, very happy with using this. All right, I think those are my only mandatory tools. Nope, see, I'm checking my notes. If you are going with the PDF printable pattern that you are printing at home, then you probably need some Scotch tape and a glue stick to put your pattern together. Those are probably things you do have. Okay, let's talk about some optional things that just make your sewing life easier, okay? So the first one is an ironing board. Many people might not think of that as optional, but having two daughters who, one lives in Brooklyn at a small apartment, there really isn't room for an ironing board. So if you're in that situation, you don't have to have one. You have to have something to iron on, but that can be as simple as, getting a towel and placing it over a board and using your iron. So you have to have the iron, but you don't have to have the ironing board. If you have the space, the ironing board is helpful, and that's great. Another optional item is a magnetic pin cushion. Your pins probably will come in a little box, and you can certainly store them that way, but pins have a way of ending up everywhere as you're sewing, especially as you're sewing a seam and pulling them out as you're going along. If you have the magnetic pin cushion, it can be by your machine. You kind of just send the pins over in that direction, and the pin cushion will grab them. It also helps if you end up spilling your pins all over the floor. You just run this over it and you can pick up all your pins. So the other people that live with you will probably really appreciate if you have a magnetic pin cushion. And if you have little children or pets around, I highly recommend it, because this is just a great way to make sure you can get those off the floor if that's where they end up, and keep those pins corralled. Glue Base-It. I love this stuff, and you'll find a million uses for it. This is the Roxanne Glue Base-It. It's one I've been really happy with, and I just highly recommend it. It's especially helpful if you're going to use piping on your dress, and I will talk about piping in just a second. But the Glue Base-It lets you hold things without, lets you temporarily hold two pieces of fabric together without using pins or clips. And sometimes that pin or the clip, especially on thicker things, is manipulating and bending it too much, and the Glue Base-It will prevent that for you. So that brings me to the next thing, and that's binding clips. These are great. They can't replace pins, but again, when you're using thicker things, they're very helpful to be able to hold that thick thing together with where a pin kind of distorts it. And so I do like the binding clips. Tweezers. Again, something you'll just find a lot of use for, being able to pull piping cord, tucking that little edge in, poking out the corner of something. They have a lot of uses, so if you can keep one in your sewing room, it's helpful. These came with my serger, so nice and long and pointy and work great. For cutting your fabric, you might want to consider a rotary cutter and a mat. And you need to have the mat to cut with the rotary cutter, or else you ruin your tables. I cut a lot of my patterns out with the rotary cutter. Again, though, there are times you absolutely need to have that scissors. So between the two, the scissors or shears, the dressmaker shears is the thing you need first. The rotary cutter is that nice addition, and it certainly does help again with the piping. Get as big a mat as you can afford, and you have room to store. You will be glad you have it, especially if you want to start cutting out whole patterns with the rotary cutter. And I keep mentioning piping, so let me show you what I'm talking about on that. On this little dress, the waist is piped right here. I'm going to, as we go through the lessons, talk about possibly piping the neckline, piping the arms opening as well. Piping is just a really simple, really inexpensive way to just add a pop of color, take your dress to the next level, and just give it that extra special touch. And it's quick, it's easy, and it's really inexpensive. If you start trying to buy trims, they can get to be very pricey, but piping is just made from a strip of material, and so it can match your fabric and look beautiful. So if you want to try the piping, and notice we're not buying ready-made piping. Ready-made piping only comes in a handful of colors. It's very thick, and instead I'm making mini piping, and mini piping comes from my smocking and heirloom background. You would never put the maxi piping that you buy the packages of on a dress like this or on smocking. It's just considered too thick and too big. So the mini piping, you need piping cord, because that's what's going to fill the piping. It keeps that nice round look. The next thing that you want that would help is a piping foot. Now, if you're thinking, oh my goodness, that's going to be really expensive, because a piping foot, I don't think ever comes standard with a machine. You want to go and look. I have a Bernina, and a Bernina foot is more expensive, but most machines, especially the less expensive machines, use a low shank foot. And a low shank piping foot you can pick up on Amazon for just a couple dollars, and it will make a huge difference in your ability to really create nice mini piping. The last optional thing I have for that mini piping also is a piping ruler. And a piping ruler has a groove cut in it that the piping slips through, and it enables you to cut down the seam allowance to the exact size you need. Now, I will show you when we get to that lesson on how to do it with just a regular ruler. So again, this isn't something that you absolutely need to have. It's just something you might want to think about and pick up down the line if you enjoy this and you like the look of adding piping to your sewing. Let me look at my list. Yeah, I think we have covered just about everything that you absolutely need to have. So that's it. You can start gathering your materials together. You will find links for all of this down below in the show notes, so you can get the supplies you need. I look forward to seeing you at our next lesson, when we are going to talk about fabric choices for your July Flowers dress. Thanks so much.